Alright guys, welcome back. In episode 4, we're going to go over authentication. Now what is authentication? Authentication is how users are going to be able to log in, log out, and register with your system. We can then use that account that they've created and attach permissions to that to give different people access to be able to do different things. We'll also use this account to signify ownership of things that they've created, like vehicles, so that they can own that vehicle and be the sole person who can interact with it in some way or another. So let's dive into the code and figure out exactly how we're going to build this authentication system. So we're going to go ahead and build this in our players resource. We're going to pop open the meta.xml, and just like in other areas, we're going to go ahead and just add a new Lua file for authentication. Now we'll go ahead and create that authentication file. And in this file, let's figure out what the 3 things that we want a user to be able to do. We want them to be able to create an account. We want them to be able to log into their account. And we want them to be able to log out of their account. So let's start with the first. How would we allow someone to create an account? Now, accounts are actually something that exist within Multi-Theft Auto itself. We can use Multi-Theft Auto's base account system to handle a lot of this magic for us. If you've looked at the Valhalla gaming codebase or any derivatives of it, you'll notice that they don't make use of the default MTA account system. They've built their own, it's custom, and this can be necessary if you're using another database than the built-in SQLite database driver, such as MySQL. There's also servers like the open source MTA Paradise project by Mabako that use some sort of hybrid between this, where they create accounts in MySQL and then in the background they associate those accounts to actual MTA accounts to handle permissions for administrative functions. In this tutorial, we're going to go over just using the actual account system that is provided by Multi-Theft Auto and how to securely use that, as it was created a long time ago and isn't exactly up to date with the latest standards for how we would expect something like a password to be stored securely. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to add a register command. And we're going to use the first 2 arguments being player and command, and then we're going to allow them to specify a username and a password. Now, what we want to do here first, because the user is entering in some data here, we want to make sure that these are actually going to be valid. So what we're going to do is say if they did not provide us with a username or did not provide us with a password, then we are going to return an error. And we'll do this by just outputting a chat box message to the user. Typically, if someone didn't enter all of the fields of a command the way that we provide, we would just remind them of the syntax here. So let's just type syntax and then use the actual command that was entered and let them know that we expect a username and a password to fill in this command, and we'll send that to the player. These 3 arguments here are RG and B. Yeah, by using 255 for all of these values, which is the maximum value you can enter for any of these, this is going to give us a pure white response message. So let's go ahead and restart our resource, restart players, and it looks like everything was successful. So if we just type register in the chat box now, you'll see that we get that syntax highlighting message there, letting us know that we need to provide a username and password. Let's jump back over to our code, and what we're going to do is we're going to then figure out what exactly we need to do in the rest of this register command. So the next step is check if an account with that username already exists. Then we want to make sure that the password is valid. So we'll enforce some sort of standard for what a valid password is. Then we want to create a hash of the password. I'll explain more on that later. And then we want to create the account. and then we will let the user know of our great success. So let's break that down. How do we check if an account with the username already exists? For this, let's jump over to the wiki and take a look at our server functions. Now you'll notice that the first chunk of server functions that are available are account functions. So this provides us with a whole bunch of different account options that we can use. We have add account to create a new account. We can get an account, and we can log in or log out of that account. So what we want to do here is we want to get account, and we will provide the username and just see if we get actual account back. So we'll see here that it returns the account or false. So we want to come back into our code and go if get account username. And we're going to then return an error message. So let's just have this error message say an account already exists with that name. And then we'll make this a shade of red so that they know that an error has occurred. We'll do that by providing red as the highest value, being RGB. So red is the highest number, so it's going to get the most precedence. And then these, we're just going to give a little bit of green and blue to lighten up that red and make it not just a pure red. So next we're going to check if the password's valid. So if to check if the password's valid, we're going to call an isPasswordValid function, and then we're going to return a similar error message saying that the password supplied was not valid. So we'll just copy that and go, the password supplied was not valid. Now this function doesn't actually exist by MTA, so we're going to have to create this ourselves. So let's just create a local function up here. And we will return the password's valid if it is greater than 6 characters. So we will return string.length password is greater than or equal to 6 characters. So the only requirement for our password right now is that it is greater than or equal to 6 characters. Now, defining 6 here in the code like this is a fairly bad practice. What we want to do here is extract this out into what's called a constant. Now, Lua itself doesn't really provide constant functionality like some other languages do, but we can signify a constant by just creating a variable that is all uppercase letters. What a constant means is once the variable has been initialized, we are never going to change it later in the code. So by creating a variable minimum password length and putting that in here, we can now see exactly what is needed to validate our password. We're only checking if it exceeds a minimum password length, and that password length is 6. This is a good practice to follow when you're coding things, to not just have numbers in the middle of the code that don't really signify anything at all. My exception to this would be something very common, like a color, where output chat box, everyone knows, if they have familiarity with scripting Lua or MTAs in particular, that this color, that these 3 values are going to mean a color. So now that we have this isPasswordValid and we're using it, we have successfully checked if the password is valid. Now let's go ahead and create a hash of the password. So a hash basically takes a password that you, a hash basically takes a string that you provide and allows you to turn it into a bunch of random letters and numbers so that in the database you don't directly see what that password is. And a hash can also not be decrypted back into its plain text value. So if someone stole your database, they wouldn't be able to just get the passwords out of your database and then use them for malicious purposes. So what we're going to do here is we are going to call the password hash function that MTA provides. And let's just jump over to the wiki and take a quick look at that. Now, password hash takes 3 parameters. We have password, algorithm, and options, and then it optionally takes this callback method. Now you can see here that they have a warning where they strongly recommend that you use the callback. So that's what we're going to do in this case, because we do not want to experience short freezes in our server. So let's go ahead and provide the password as the first argument. Now for the algorithm, the really only algorithm that's supported out of the box right now for MTA is bcrypt, which is perfect. That's what we'll use here, bcrypt. And then we'll go ahead and pass in nothing as the options. We're just going to go with the default bcrypt options. And then let's go ahead and create our closure with the hashed password. Now that we have the password hashed, what we're going to do is we're going to take these comments and we're going to pull them inside of our closure, because we are going to execute these only once we have our hashed password value. So to create the account, what we need to do is we need to use our add account function that's provided by MTA. And we're going to store the result in a local account variable. Now we want to be sure to use the hashed password value and not our plain text password value when we're passing it to add account. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set some account data against our account, and we're going to go hashed password. Now, this is where I was talking about we're going to do something a little bit different to raise the security expectations of the default MTA functionality. When you do add account through MTA, what it does is it automatically hashes the secondary value with a different hashing algorithm than bcrypt. It uses something called MD5. MD5 was the standard a very long time ago, but has since been really thought of by people to be not as good in more recent years, and bcrypt is a far better alternative. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pass in this hash password, and we'll store the bcrypt value separately in this account data and just completely ignore the MD5 value that is in the accounts table. So now that we've created this account and set the account data, what we're going to do is we're going to let the user know that we were successful and output a success message. Now you'll notice here that I'm using account login and not login. The reason for this is because Multi-Theft Auto out of the box provides a /login method, and it's a little bit complicated to override the functionality that's behind that login command. So we're just going to create a separate one. In an actual server, what we will probably eventually do is create some sort of GUI and not use commands to register and log in, but that's a later tutorial. So let's send this message to the player, and we will send that as green. So green is the second value in our RGB. So we'll provide that as 255, make the others 100. And this looks pretty good. We now should theoretically have a register that works and allows people to register their accounts. So let's just jump over to our server and restart players one more time. Now that we've restarted players, let's come back into the server and let's /register. And we still get our error message. So let's try registering an actual user. And we're going to register this test user with a random password. Let's try using an invalid password first to make sure that our invalid password functionality is working. So we'll just try pass1. It's 5 characters, should be getting our supplied passwords not valid. Perfect. Let's see if this actually will work. And good, we now have an account. So let's just jump over to our database real quick and see if we have any users in our accounts table. And we do. So we can see here we have a username, we have a password, we have an IP, a serial, and an HTTP pass. So the IP is going to be the user's IP address. I believe we can set that account data along with the serial, which is their unique multi-theft auto serial number. This is very useful if you need to ban someone. You can ban their IP address and serial so that they can no longer access your server. An HTTP pass is something so that you can make a website that connects into your multi-theft auto server. We'll dive into that at a later point. But you can see here we have this random string. This password value is our MD5 password value that we're going to avoid using. If we come over to user data, we'll see we have a hashed pass value, which has our actual bcrypted value, which we do want to keep. And so let's just jump back over to our server real quick. And now that we're back in the code, let's try and implement that account login. Again, we're going to accept the player, the command, the username, and password. And what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that we allow people to use a lowercase, because if we do account login like this, chances are someone will put a lowercase l and not know why it's broken. And while we're at it, let's just do that for this up above as well. So what we want to do here is basically the same thing as we did up above. Make sure that a username or password were actually provided. And then let's try and get the account. So let's do local account is get account, and we'll get it by their username. If we did not get an account, then let's let the user know with an error. Now, you'll notice here that we say with that username or password, even though we haven't checked that the password exists, we could tell them specifically that that account doesn't exist with just that username, but the less information you give someone, the better. It provides you with a little bit of security that the person can't deduce that the account exists or doesn't exist and then just try and brute force a password. Now that we've got that, the next thing that we need to do is we need to validate that their password is actually correct for that account. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back over to the wiki, and what we're going to do is search up password verify. Password verify is a function very similar to password hash, except for you pass it in both the password and the hash, and it will verify that the hash that you provided is valid for that password. So what we are going to do is come back over to our code and run password verify. And then we are going to grab the account data that we created before of hashed password. And then we're going to create a closure just like we did above with the argument is valid. And if our password is not valid, then what we're going to do is just return an error. Oops, we forgot to return this guy up here. We're going to do the same thing here, and we're just going to provide the exact same error message. Less amount of data, better. Now that we are here, we know that the user has a valid account. What we're going to do is we're going to log in that player. So let's just jump back over to the wiki and check out what our login function does. Login takes 3 arguments: the player, the account, and the password. So let's jump back over to our code and implement that. So the player is going to be player, the account is going to be our account, and the password is going to be this hash password value that we had saved previously. So let's just extract that out into a variable. And we'll use that variable down here. And we'll return a success message if they were able to successfully log in. And we'll make that green. And then down here, we'll just throw a generic error message again if we could not log in with that player. So let's give this a try. Let's jump back over to our server and we will restart players, and then we will come over here and let's account login, test user, and password. And if we look at that, it says we have successfully logged in. Perfect. So now if we come back over to our code, there's only one thing left to do: account logout. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create another command called account logout. And then all we're going to do here is use the logout method that is provided by MTA and pass in our player object. We don't actually need the command in this case. And this logout method should actually output a message on its own that we've logged out. And that's pretty much it. So let's give that a try. We'll restart players. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to try account logout. And you logged out. Perfect. So let's review the code one more time. We have a register command, which allows users to create their own account if that account does not already exist. We allow users to log in using the password that they previously used to create their account. And then we allow them to log out. In the next episode, we're going to go over how to use these accounts to create admin roles and permissions to give only specific users access to certain commands. That's going to be it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one.